Have you ever wondered why one of history's greatest thinkers is now a lightning rod for controversy? In the next 60 seconds, we're diving into Aristotle's most shocking views on women, ideas so extreme they'd land him in a modern-day scandal. You'll hear how he argued that women are mutilated males, deemed incapable of full reason, and even insisted they belong entirely under male authority. We'll unpack 7 jaw-dropping quotes that feminist scholars still cite as proof of his deep-seated bias, and ask whether any of his ideas hold up today. Stay with us as we contrast Aristotle's world with our own, reveal who profited from his gender hierarchy, and expose the absurdities hiding behind his celebrated logic. And stick around for our AI-generated "What Would Aristotle Tweet?" segment, our signature twist that brings ancient wisdom into the 21st century. Ready to challenge the foundations of Western thought? Let's get started. Chapter 1. Introduction to Aristotle's Sexism. In this video, we will explore how Aristotle laid the foundation for sexism, which continues to drive feminists into hysterics to this day. With that brutal line, Aristotle planted the cornerstone of systemic misogyny, so powerful that feminist outrages echo through 21st century headlines. He didn't merely observe gender roles, he codified women as biologically inferior, a defective form of man destined for subordination. By the way, the term hysteria was also coined by Aristotle. Term hysteria from the Greek hystera, uterus, to brand women's emotions as a wound-driven pathology. In his Medicine, he argued that an unmoored uterus wandered through the body, causing irrational fits and tears. This ancient origin story didn't just medicalize female anger. It licensed centuries of dismissing women as hysterical weaklings. On the one hand, if women did not manipulate and control emotions in the same way as men, then Aristotle probably would not have labeled them hysterics, which has not been removed for more than 2,000 years. On the other hand, Aristotle could not even correctly count the number of teeth in women. He was convinced that men had more teeth purely physiologically. Or maybe he simply could not count to 30. Who knows him? You should have approached Pythagoras. He would have pulled him up in arithmetic. Today's feminist scholars trace every stereotype, from mad women locked in asylums to online trolls deriding female rage, back to the philosopher who turned biology into bigotry. In this video, we'll expose 7 of Aristotle's most outrageous claims about women, reveal how they powered patriarchal laws, and ask, should his towering legacy now come tumbling down? Let's dive in. Chapter 2. Historical Context. Aristotle's World and the Roots of Patriarchy. To understand why Aristotle's sexism still reverberates today, we must step into the sun-baked agora of 4th century BC Athens, a society where male supremacy was not an opinion but an unquestioned law. Women lived cloistered lives, barred from citizenship, property rights, and public speech. Their value was measured by dowry size and childbearing capacity, not intellect or character. Aristotle, the man of his time. Born in 384 BC in Stagira, a small Macedonian town, Aristotle arrived in Athens at 17 to study under Plato. He learned lofty ideals, justice, virtue, the examined life, but he did not extend these ideals to half his species. After Plato's death, Aristotle spent years in the Macedonian court tutoring a young Alexander. He observed power wielded by men, kings, generals, philosophers, and absorbed a hard-nosed belief authority and reason belonged to males alone. When he founded his own school, the Lyceum, Aristotle assembled lectures on ethics, politics, and natural science. But his science of women was built on observation filtered through prejudice. He dissected animals' reproductive organs, noting differences in genitalia, and leapt to the conclusion that women were simply incomplete males. He codified this in Generation of Animals, teaching that the male principle begets form and reason, while the female contributes only material, a philosophical sleight of hand that transformed biological curiosity into a blueprint for female subjugation. Patriarchy as natural order. Aristotle proclaimed that master-slave relations were natural, and so by his logic were male-female relations. He argued in politics that the household mirrored the state. The man, like the king, ruled by nature. The woman, like the child, was subject. Any attempt by women to speak in the assembly, run businesses, or pursue scholarship was, in his eyes, a violation of this divine hierarchy. This wasn't dry theory. Aristotle's writings fueled Athenian laws that confined women to the gymnasium, women's quarters, stripped them of legal standing, and punished them more harshly for the same offenses men committed. His authority as the philosopher, anointed by generations of scholars, made his misogyny more than personal bias. It became the intellectual scaffolding for a patriarchal empire. From Alexandria to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Fast forward 3 millennia. Aristotle's works became the spine of medieval scholasticism, the bedrock of natural law theory, and the canon of countless theology and philosophy courses. His gendered hierarchies found new life in church decrees and secular codes alike. Even today, remnants of his thinking cloak debates about women's roles, from corporate boardrooms to political candidacies, laid atop the bedrock he built. When modern feminists rail against institutional patriarchy, they are battling an edifice whose mortar includes Aristotle's natural distinctions. Every plea for equal pay, reproductive freedom, or representation in government runs headlong into arguments first forged by the man who taught that women, by nature, lack the full measure of reason. In the next segment, we'll dismantle 7 of his most outrageous claims, revealing how each one served to lock women out of power and how those very ideas still leak into our laws, our language, and our minds. Prepare to see the ancient world's most celebrated thinker exposed as its most dangerous ideologue. Chapter 3. 7 of Aristotle's most shocking statements on women. Below are 7 brutally misogynistic claims straight from Aristotle's pen, each one a dagger to women's equality that still echoes through centuries of patriarchy. 1. The female is by nature inferior and the male superior. He said it in Politics, Book I. What he meant: women are biologically and intellectually subordinate. Men possess the inherent right to rule them. Why it sickens us, he turned human worth into a birthright lottery. By declaring half the population naturally inferior, he legitimized centuries of disenfranchisement, from denial of the vote to exclusion from education. 2. A woman is an incomplete male. Source: generation of animals. What he meant: women are mere defects or mutilated males, physically and mentally unfinished versions of men. Why it enrages us: he medicalized misogyny, treating women as anatomical curiosities rather than full human beings. This dehumanizing view provided scientific backing for treating women as property. 3. The womb is a wandering organ. Source: on the parts of animals and medical texts attributed to him. What he meant: the uterus literally roams the female body, causing hysteria, from Greek hystera, uterus, whenever it's unsettled. Why it's absurd: this archaic theory birthed the term hysteria to dismiss every woman's emotion as a physical defect. Even today, calling someone hysterical invokes this ancient insult. 4. Women lack deliberative faculty. Source: Nicomachean Ethics, implied in his ethical discussions. What he meant: women cannot engage in true practical reasoning. Their judgments are driven by emotion and sensation. Why it's poisonous: he barred women from positions requiring judgment, legal, political, educational, claiming they simply couldn't think straight. 5. A woman's place is in the home. Source: Politics, Book I. What he meant: women belong under the authority of husband and household. They are ruled like children or slaves. Why it's enraging: he anchored domestic servitude as natural order, giving archaeological fuel to laws that confined women to kitchens and nurseries for millennia. 6. Female pleasure is lower than male pleasure. Source: Ethics and Medical Theories of Pleasure. What he meant: a woman's sexual gratification is base and animalistic, a distraction from higher pursuits. Men's desires are noble and rational. Why it's degrading: he disparaged female sexuality, branding it a flaw to be controlled, while exalting male desire as a driver of virtue and creativity. 7. If women ruled, cities would be undone. Source: attributed in later summaries of his Politics. What he meant: female governance would lead to chaos. Women lack the strength and wisdom to maintain law, war, or civic order. Why it's infuriating: he dismissed female political agency outright, foreshadowing modern arguments used to block women's suffrage and leadership roles. Modern backlash: each of these statements formed the intellectual mortar of patriarchal systems, from Roman law to medieval canon law, from Victorian etiquette manuals to 20th century gender studies debates. Feminist scholars trace misogynistic tropes, from dismissing a woman's testimony in court to labeling female activists emotional, straight back to Aristotle's wisdom. In the next segment, we'll see how these absurdities were woven into legal codes, how centuries of expert opinion reinforced them, and why dismantling Aristotle's sexist legacy remains a revolutionary act today. Chapter 4. Paradoxes and fatal contradictions in Aristotle's views. Aristotle wasn't merely a misogynist. His arguments collapse under the weight of their own inconsistencies. Here are 4 of his most glaring contradictions, each exposing fatal flaws in his so-called scientific sexism. 1 champion of rationality, yet women lack reason. His claim, reason is humanity's highest gift, and women, he insists, possess only a rudimentary share of it. The paradox. Aristotle built his entire ethical system on the premise that all human beings, by virtue of reason, can pursue virtue and happiness. Yet he arbitrarily exempts half the populace from this defining trait. How can an ethical framework that depends on universal rational agency sustain itself if it simultaneously denies rationality to women? His own logic, intended to be holistic, unravels the moment he excludes women from the category full human. 2. Observer of nature, but blind to its diversity. His claim, biology reveals a natural hierarchy. Men beget form, women supply only matter. The paradox. In his History of Animals, Aristotle marvels at the variety and adaptability of living creatures, yet when it comes to human females he proposes a one-size-fits-all biopolitics. He observes that in some fish and insects sex roles reverse, but refuses to see any nuance in human social roles. He lauds nature's complexity everywhere, except in the organization of his own household, which he locks into rigid gender cages. His science of variation disappears the moment he meets a woman. 3. Advocate of golden mean, but takes extremes on gender. His claim, virtue lies in the middle, bravery avoids both rashness and cowardice, generosity steers between wastefulness and stinginess. The paradox. Aristotle's signature doctrine of the golden mean demands moderation in all things, yet he speaks of women with absolute extremes, as wholly irrational or wholly subservient. There is no mean female state between full rational agent and subhuman deformity. He preaches balance in ethics but practices fanaticism in patriarchy, discarding his own model of moderation when it comes to sexism. 4. Architect of political justice, but denies women citizenship. His claim, justice is giving each individual their due, in accordance with their merit and nature. The paradox. Aristotle defines justice as proportional equality. Those who contribute to the polis deserve a share in its governance. Yet he denies citizenship, and thus the very ability to contribute to women, equating them with slaves and children. He upholds justice as a foundational political virtue, then rips it apart by construing women as naturally unworthy of political voice. His ideal city, where law reigns, stands on a foundation that he simultaneously condemns as legally invalid when women are involved. Why these contradictions matter? By contradicting his own principles, Aristotle reveals that his sexism is not a neutral scientific finding but a willful ideological distortion. These paradoxes were codified into Western thought, revered as Aristotelianism, even when they directly violated his stated commitments to reason, nature's complexity, moderation, and justice. Today's debates about gender pay gaps, reproductive rights, and representation still grapple with echoes of his false dichotomies. Challenging Aristotle's contradictions is not mere academic nitpicking. It strikes at the roots of systemic bias that persists in law, medicine, and culture. In the next segment, we'll bring in feminist scholars and activists to show how Aristotle's paradoxical legacy has been wielded to justify discrimination, and how they're fighting back to reclaim true equality. Chapter 5. Feminist Critique. Aristotle's Sexism under the Microscope. Modern feminist scholars have dissected Aristotle's misogyny with forensic precision, revealing how his seismic influence cemented gender injustice for millennia. Here are 4 cutting critiques that expose the real-world damage of his so-called philosophy. Legalized inequality. Aristotle's doctrine. Women are naturally unfit for citizenship and political deliberation. Feminist rebuttal. Nancy Hirschman and Susan Mahler-Oken have shown that Aristotle's political theory wasn't abstract. It directly shaped Athenian law and later Roman and medieval codes. By branding women incapable of rational judgment, he provided the intellectual cover for excluding them from voting, property ownership, and legal testimony. This legacy lingers. Even today, laws in some nations trace back to the principle that women's testimony is less reliable in court or that their property rights can be overridden by male guardians. Medical misinformation. Aristotle's doctrine. The wandering uterus causes hysteria. Women are prone to emotional excess. Feminist rebuttal. Elaine Showalter and Fausto Sterling have mapped a direct line from Aristotle's wandering womb to Victorian female hysteria diagnoses to 20th century lobotomies targeting rebellious women, to the modern trivialization of women's mental health. When a woman expresses anger or sadness, the reflexive label hysterical still echoes Aristotle's medical absurdity, dismissing real emotional distress as a womb-centered disease. Educational disenfranchisement. Aristotle's doctrine: girls should receive at most a rudimentary education in household management. Feminist rebuttal. Linda L. Bergman's research on ancient schooling reveals that Aristotle's pedagogy set the stage for centuries of female illiteracy. His assertion that women's minds were incapable of higher reasoning provided rationales for barring them from universities until the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Even today, STEM fields grapple with a cultural inheritance that questions girls' aptitude, a direct descendant of Aristotelian bias. Cultural canonization of misogyny. Aristotle's doctrine: philosophical authority resides in the male thinker. Female perspectives are suspect. Feminist rebuttal. Luce Irigaray and Sandra Harding have critiqued the masculine construction of knowledge in the Western philosophical tradition, naming Aristotle as a prime culprit. His towering reputation made his biased views the default lens through which all subsequent thinkers, Thomas Aquinas, Kant, Hegel, interpreted nature and ethics. This masculine canon still defines academic curricula. Women philosophers remain underrepresented in syllabi, perpetuating the very exclusion Aristotle first theorized. The personal toll. Lived injustice. Women who dared speak publicly, Aspasia in Athens, Hypatia in Alexandria, were labeled dangerous exceptions, their voices erased or violently suppressed, echoing Aristotle's dismissal of female rhetoric. The legal doctrine of patria potestas, father's power, in Rome, partly justified by Aristotelian natural hierarchy, gave men absolute control over wives and daughters, up to life or death decisions. In some cultures today, similar powers still exist under religious or customary law, a chilling legacy of ancient philosophy. Feminist victory march. Despite this bleak history, feminists have mobilized Aristotle's critiques into a rallying cry. 1. Reclaiming language. Campaigns against the word hysteria have led to its removal from many medical dictionaries, a direct blow to Aristotle's misogynistic nomenclature. 2. Curricular reform. Universities worldwide now include feminist philosophy courses that spotlight Aristotle's gender bias, ensuring students confront his failings rather than revere them uncritically. 3. Legal challenges. Activists cite Aristotelian critiques in court cases to dismantle guardianship laws and expand women's testimony rights, transforming his arguments into tools for liberation. Aristotle's sexist scaffolding still props up elements of her laws, medicine, and culture, but the feminist critique is restructuring the foundations. In our next section, we'll ask, are there any surviving gems of Aristotle's thought that can be disentangled from his misogyny? Or must we consign him entirely to the dustbin of history? Stay tuned. Chapter 6. Modern Reevaluation. Can we mine Aristotle for gold? As we peel back the layers of Aristotle's towering legacy, a question emerges. Is there any wisdom worth salvaging, or must we consign him to the dustbin of history? On one hand, he laid the foundations of logic, natural inquiry, and ethical reflection. On the other, his blatant misogyny undermines the very universality he claimed for his philosophy. In contemporary philosophy departments, you'll still find Aristotle's Organon on every shelf, prized for its rigorous analysis of syllogism and causality. Students learn to test arguments, identify fallacies, and build coherent systems of thought, all gifts from the Stagirite. Yet when his metaphysical models and political theories enter gender studies or human rights forums, they often collapse under their own contradictions. A philosopher who preached moderation cannot defend the extreme subordination of women without betraying his own golden mean. Psychologists, too, find both treasure and trash in his writings. Cognitive behavioral therapy owes a debt to Stoicism's emphasis on reframing judgments, but Aristotle's view that women lack practical wisdom has no place in modern clinical practice. Today's therapists recognize that emotional intelligence transcends gender boundaries, and that dismissing half the population's insights can only hamper healing and growth. So where does that leave us? For those craving intellectual roots, it's still possible to study Aristotle critically, extracting his observations on virtue, friendship, and human flourishing while rigorously rejecting his sexist doctrines. His Nicomachean ethics can guide our pursuit of character, provided we read it alongside voices silenced by his hierarchy, Sappho, Hypatia, and the chorus of heretical women philosophers across centuries. In politics and public policy, his vision of a mixed constitution, combining monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, can spark creative debate about checks and balances. Yet any modern architect of governance must anchor equality not in a natural order, but in universal human rights. We cannot build inclusive societies on foundations that Aristotle himself declared exclusive. As we move into our final segment, we'll strap on our digital helmets and ask, what would Aristotle look like in 2025? Would he tweet sexist aphorisms or embrace the global chorus demanding equity? Our AI-powered simulation will give us a glimpse, because the last word on Aristotle may belong not to us, but to the machine. Chapter 7. AI Generation. Aristotle in 2025, Deplatformed Philosopher or Cancelled Icon. Imagine Aristotle reborn today. He launches a YouTube channel. Aristotle speaks, posts TED-style talks, and tweets aphorisms at dawn. But on his very first week, he drops a live stream titled Women's Reason, a Defect in Nature, quoting verbatim from Generation of Animals. Within hours, social media uproar. Hashtags like #Aristotle was wrong and #misogynist philosopher trend worldwide. His Twitter/X account is reported en masse for hate speech. Platform bans. YouTube demonetizes his channel. Instagram suspends his profile for violating community standards on gender discrimination. Facebook locks his page pending review. Academic repercussions. Prestigious universities rescind his honorary professorship. His guest lecture at Stanford is canceled midstream as students stage a walkout, holding signs, "Aristotle belongs in a museum, not a lecture hall." Legal threats. Human rights lawyers cite modern anti-discrimination laws, investigating whether his incomplete male rhetoric constitutes gender-based incitement. There's even talk of a civil lawsuit by feminist groups for reputational harm. Yet Aristotle, true to his dialectical method, doubles down. He uploads a recorded debate on natural hierarchies, defending his views as timeless truths, arguing that justice must reflect nature. AI-generated voice modules replicate his baritone Greek accent, making each provocation eerily authentic. The irony, in attempting to preserve his legacy, he becomes the poster child for everything progressive movements reject. His organon of logic is praised, but his policy prescriptions are condemned as archaic and dangerous. He finds himself in the paradox he once admired, stripped of political power yet more famous than ever. Aristotle's misogyny would not survive a single week in our hyper-connected digital age, deplatformed, denounced, and possibly decredentialed. His work on syllogisms lives on. His sexist doctrines get deleted. If you found this journey from ancient Athens to modern cancel culture eye-opening, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's most controversial thinkers. Tell us in the comments, which ancient philosopher would you resurrect? And would you cancel them or champion them? Let's debate.